Welcome to GinGee GoodEarth programs. Your host Gretchen Schmitt, and the music in the background is Irene Goodnight. You can see that on the label. And she's one of the Pittsburgh Victorian Gibson girls. And again, I'd like to welcome you tonight. It's June 12th, Friday. And I'm putting a video together so I can help finish the book, The Universal History of the United States of America. And I'd like to read a couple poems first. Enjoy the music. I'm not going to compete with it. Remember, this is not a dress rehearsal. Once I get a video prepared, I just run right through it. The first poem I'd like to read is a best loved poems of the American people. It's on nature, and I'm sure you're familiar with it if you love American historic poems. It's called Trees. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair. And one of the pictures in my picture slideshow is a bird's nest with very pretty turquoise robin eggs, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with the rain. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. It's written by Joyce Kilmer. And I wanted to also give a great thought of the day. Nothing is impossible. The word itself says, I'm possible. Audrey Hepburn. So I'll remove this. This is, who we're listening to is Irene Goodnight on many of the videos. This album is called I'm Gonna Fly. And we're going to start on page 55. We're resuming. So this is Roman numeral 6, part 5. Okay, page 55 at the bottom. Just before, well, the Saxons, the Montonato, and the 70 or 80 of their chief counselors and warriors took their route towards the Hudson River. Just before Captain Mason went out upon the expedition against the Pequots, the Dutch performed a very neighborly office for Connecticut. The two maids who had been captivated at Withersfield had, though the humanity and meditation of Monotto's squaw, been spared from death and kindly treated. The Dutch governor, receiving intelligence of their circumstances, determined to redeem them at any rate, and dispatched a sloop to the Pequot harbor for that purpose. Upon its arrival, the Dutch made large offers for their redemption, but the Pequots would not accept them. Finally, as the Dutch had a number of Pequots on board whom they had taken, and finding that they could do no better, they offered the Pequots 6 of their own men for the 2 maids. Those they accepted, and the Dutch delivered the young woman to Saybrook just before Captain Mason and his party arrived. Of them he received particular information respecting the enemy. An Indian runner dispatched by Mr. Williams at Providence soon carried the news of the success of Connecticut against the Pequots to the governor of Massachusetts. The governor and his council, judging that the Pequots had received a capital blow, sent forward by 120 men. These were commanded by Mr. Stratton, and Reverend Mr. Wilson of Boston was sent as his chaplain. This party arrived at Pequot Harbor the latter part of June. By the assistance of the Narragansett Indians, the party under Captain Stratton surrounded a large body of Pequots in a swamp. They took 80 captives. 30 were men, the rest were women and children. The men, except 2 sachems, were killed, but the women and children were saved. The sachems promised to conduct the English to Sassacus, and for that purpose were spared for the present. The court of Connecticut ordered that 40 men should be raised forthwith for the further persecution of the war against the Pequots, to be commanded by Captain Mason. The troops from Connecticut made a junction with the party under the command of Captain Stratton at Pequot. Mr. Ludlow, with other principal gentlemen from Connecticut, went also with the army to advise with respect to the measures to be adopted in further prosecution of the war. Under general consultation, it was concluded to pursue the Pequots, who had fled westward. The army marched immediately and soon discovered the places where the enemy had rendezvoused and their several removes. As they were not far from each other, it appeared that they moved slowly, having their women and children with them. They also were without provisions, and were obliged to dig for clams, and to range the groves for such articles as they afforded. The English found some scattering Pequots as they scoured the countryside, whom they captivated, and from whom they obtained intelligence relative to the Pequots whom they were pursuing, but finding the sachems whom they had spared would give them no information, they had beheaded them on their march at a place called Menucontuck. Since Guilford, from which circumstance that spot on which the execution was done bears the name of Sachem's Head to this present time. In 3 days they arrived at New Haven harbor. The vessels sailed along the shore, while the troops marched by the land. So that kind of catches us up on the chapters on page 57. At New Haven, then called Quinnipiac, a great smoke at a small distance was discovered in the woods. The officers, supposing they had now discovered the enemy, ordered the army immediately to advance upon them. But were soon informed that they were not in the vicinity. The Connecticut Indians had kindled the fires whence the smoke arose. The troops soon embarked on board the vessels. After staying several days at New Haven, the officers received intelligence from a Pequot, whom they had previously sent to make discovery, that the enemy were at the considerable distance in a great swamp to the westward. Upon the information, the army marched with all possible dispatch to a great swamp in Fairfield, where the 80 or 100 Pequot warriors and nearly 200 other Indians were gathered. The swamp was such a thicket, so deep and boggy, that it was difficult to enter it or make any movement without sinking in the mire. Lieutenant Davenport and others rushing eagerly into it were sorely wounded, and several were soon so deep in the mud that they could not get out without assistance. The enemy pressed them so hard that they were just ready to seize them by the hair of their head. A number of brave men were obliged to rescue them, a sword in hand. Some of the Indians were slain, and the men were drawn out of the mire. The swamp was surrounded, and after a considerable skirmish, the Indians desired a parley. As the officers were not willing to make a promiscuous destruction of men, women, and children, and as the Sachem and Indians of the vicinity had fled into the swamp, though they had done the colonies no injury, a parley was granted. Thomas Stanton, a man well acquainted with the manners and language of the Indians, was sent to treat with them. He was authorized to offer life to all the Indians who had shed no English blood. So they were working on a treaty. And again, the Bureau of Indian Affairs in our United States of America division is supposed to represent the first Americans, and there is a review of every treaty that was broken, which is unlawful, and that's still under review, but you have to research this, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So we're back to this. So this gentleman, he was to, treat with them. The Sachem of the place declared for himself and his Indians, and they had never shed the blood of the English nor them any harm. But the Pequot warriors had too great a spirit to accept the offer of life, declaring that they would fight it out. They shot their arrows at Stanton and pressed so hard upon him that the soldiers were obliged to fly to his rescue. The fight was then renewed, the soldiers firing upon them whenever an opportunity presented. But by reason of an unhappy division among the officers, a great part of the enemy escaped. Some were forcing the swamp immediately, but this was opposed as too dangerous. Others were for cutting it down, as they had taken many hatchets with which they were of the opinion it might be effected. Some others were for making the palisado and hedge around it. But neither of these measures could be adopted. As night came on, the English cut through a very narrow part of it, by which the circumference was greatly lessened, so that the soldiers at 12 feet distance from each other were able to completely to compass the enemy. In this manner they enclosed and watched them until it was nearly morning. A thick fog arose just before the day, and it became exceedingly dark. At this juncture, the Indians took the opportunity to break through the English. They made their first attempt upon Captain Patrick's quarters, yelling in their hideous manner and pressing on the violence, but they were several times driven back. As the noise tumult of war increased, Captain Mason sent a party to assist Captain Patrick. Captain Trask also marched to reinforce him. As the battle greatly increased, the siege broke up Captain Mason's march to give assistance in the action. Advancing to turn the swamp, he found the enemy were pressing upon him, but he gave them so warm a reception that they were soon glad to retire, while he was expecting that they would make another attempt upon him. They faced about, and failing violently on Captain Patrick, broke through his quarters and fled. These were the bravest warriors, 60 or 70 of whom made their escape. About 20 were killed and 180 were taken prisoners. The English also took hatchets, wampum, kettles, trays, and other Indian utensils. The Pequot women and children who had been captivated were divided among the troops. Some were carried to Connecticut and others to the Massachusetts. The people of Massachusetts sent a number of the women and boys to the West Indies and sold them for slaves. It was supposed that about 700 Pequots were destroyed. The women who were captivated reported that 13 Sachems had been slain and that 13 yet survived. Among the latter were Sixacus and Nato, the two chief Sachems. These, with about 20 of their best men, fled to the Mohawks. They carried off wampum to the amount of 500 pounds. The Mohawks surprised and slew them all, except the Nato. They wounded him, but he made his escape. The scalp of Sisacus was sent to Connecticut in the fall. And again, scalping was a European warlike tool. That did not originate in the first Americas. Just to let you know. So anyhow, and again, the different nations, they fought among each other. So even though the Pequots and the others escaped to the Mohawks went ahead and slew the whole group because they were very territorial and there's only so much resource and food to go around. And the wampum, I guess that is 500 pounds, is their valued as money. And again, that's just all wampum is seashells. The scalp of Sisacus was sent to Connecticut in the fall, and Mr. Ludlow and several other gentlemen going into Massachusetts in September carried a lock of it to Boston as a rare sight and sure demonstration of the death of their mortal enemy. And again, this is wartime in the Americas, and it was crude and it was brutal. Among the Pequot captives were the wife and children of Nato. She was particularly noticed by the English for her great modesty, humanity, and good sense. She made it as her only request that she might not be injured either as to her offspring or her personal honor. As a requital of her kindness to the captivated maids, her life and the lives of her children were not only spared, but they were particularly recommended to the care of Governor Winthrop. He gave charge for their protection and kind treatment. After the swamp fight, the Pequots became so weak and scattered that the Narragansetts and the Mohicans constantly killed them and brought in their heads to Windsor and Hartford. Those who survived were so hunted and harassed that a number of their chiefs' men repaired to the English at Hartford for relief. They offered their lives might be spared, that they would become the servants of the English and be disposed of at their pleasure. This was granted, and the court interposed for their protection. Uncas and Miantinomaho, with the Pequots, by the direction of the magistrates of Connecticut, met at Hartford, and it was demanded by them how many of the Pequots were yet living. They answered about 200, besides women and children. The magistrates then entered into a firm covenant with them to the following effect: that there should be a perpetual peace between my Antonamo and Uncas and their respective Indians, and that all past injuries should be remitted and forever buried. That if any injuries should be done in future by one party to the other, that they should be not immediately revenged it, but appealed to the English to do them justice. It was stipulated that they should submit to their determination, and that if either party should be obstinate, that then they might enforce submission to their decisions. It was further agreed that neither the Mohicans nor Narragansetts should conceal nor entertain any of their enemies, but deliver up or destroy all such Indians as had murdered any English man or woman. The English then gave the Pequot Indians to the Narragansetts and Mohicans, 80 to the Miantonomo, 20 to Ninigret, and the other 100 to Uncas, to be received and treated as their men. It was also covenanted that the Pequots should never more inhabit their native country, nor be called Pequots, but Narragansetts and Mohicans. It was also further stipulated that neither the Narragansetts nor Mohicans should possess any part of the Pequot country without the consent of the English. The Pequots were to pay a tribute at Connecticut annually of a fathom of wampum peg for every senap, of half a fathom for every young man, and a hand for every male papoose. On these conditions, the magistrates, in behalf of the colony, stipulated a firm peace with all the Indians. The conquest of the Pequots struck all the Indians in New England with terror, and they were possessed with such fear of the displeasure and arms of the English that they had no open war with them for nearly 40 years. This happy event gave great joy to the colonies. A day of public thanksgiving was appointed, and in all the churches of New England devout and animated praises were addressed to him, who giveth his people the victory and causeth them to dwell safely. The war with the Pequots led to the discovery of Quinnipiac, now New Haven. Mr. Eaton, Mr. Hopkins, Mr. Davenport, and several others commenced a settlement, and on the 18th of April, 1638, they kept the first Sabbath in that place. They assembled under a large spreading oak, and Mr. Davenport preached to them from the Matthew book of the Bible. On the 1st of June, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, was a great earthquake throughout New England. The shock was so great that the number of chimneys were thrown down. The earth by turns was unquiet for 15 days. In addition to the town of New Haven, several other towns were soon commenced which were included in this colony. In 1639 commenced the towns of Guilford and Milford. Stamford was settled in 1641. Soon after began the town of Brantford. Some settlements on Long Island, the town of Brantford, some settlements on Long Island were included in the colony of New Haven. The colony of New Hampshire, which now holds a distinguished rank among the New England states, though its settlement began at a very early period, did not become a separate colony till many years after the settlement commenced. Captain Smith of Virginia, who sailed along the shore of New England in 1614 and published a chart of the coast with some account of the country, discovered the river of Piscataqua. He found the river to be large, the harbor capacious and safe, and gave a favorable representation of the place as a site for a new plantation. And again, to look back, they had a 40-year peacetime after their skirmishes. And I'm going to end there on page 61, and the next paragraph is Gorges and Mason, 2 members of the Council of Plymouth in England, having obtained from the council a grant of tract of country, attempted the establishment of the colony and fishery of the river Piscataqua. In the spring of the year 1623, they sent over a few persons for this purpose, who sat down on the south side of the river near its mouth, and there fixed a temporary residence. This was the beginning of the excellent and flourishing town of Port Smith. The same year, 2 of the company erected a fish house at the place of the present town of Dover. So these settlements, and we'll continue on. We're going to bookmark this on page 62 at the next video. And I'll let you finish up this video since it's a time limit, and we can listen to Irene Goodnight. I found my look and see glasses. Let's take a look and see. That was Irene Goodnight from her album I Wanna Fly. And I have a couple more poems and quotes that I like to review until the video ends. Well done is better than well said. Benjamin Franklin. Kindness in words creates confidence. Kindness in thinking creates profoundness. Kindness in giving creates love. Lao Tzu. Anyone who ever gave you confidence, you owe them a lot. Truman Capote.
The steam rising and fogging the faint pains, just as a dream tainted with whispered reality. Have you ever dreamed? Have you ever dreamed?
This is spearmint and oregano, and my thyme bloomed, so that's why there's white flowers.
Same steam causing the temperature of your face to heat up. As you wake up and wonder, was it real or was it your scream? Have you ever dreamed? Have you ever dreamed? Have you ever dreamed that you were screaming? Maybe you were tying your naked bodies into a knot. The passion well oiled the sweat and the steam from your lover's breath on the back of your neck as you arise and realize it was only your cat.
Thank you. Have a nice day, and I look forward to playing the next video and composing another fine session on the book A Universal History of the United States of America. Thank you for listening to the videos, and please check in to GinGee GoodEarth videos, and you can check my website Wild Trout Lily at Etsy.com for the books Honey for All, Pittsburgh, Victoria, and All That Is Gilded, and White Buffalo Spirit. Have a great day.